The old house felt different now. Sarah wandered through the living room, the blue of her dress a soft echo against the muted tones of the furniture. Blue, Mark's favorite. A silly detail she remembered from childhood, clinging to her like the scent of her mother's perfume. Tonight, the scent was absence. Her parents, promising to be home by 10, had called with apologies, a late meeting unavoidable. She glanced at the clock, its ticking amplified in the quiet. It was just past 9. Loneliness gnawed, a familiar ache she usually kept at bay with movies or calls to friends. But tonight, the silence seemed to hum with anticipation, a strange, unsettling current beneath the surface calm. She remembered scraped knees and bedtime stories, Mark's voice a soothing drone against the monsters under her bed. He'd build pillow forts that seemed like castles and draw silly pictures on napkins during dinner. He was safe, a comforting presence in a world that sometimes felt too big. But even then, there were moments, fleeting and indistinct, that now prickled at the edge of her memory. A lingering hug, a hand resting a little too long on her back while helping her with homework. Nothing concrete, just a feeling, a whisper of something more. She pushed the thought away, a shiver tracing its path down her spine. The phone rang, shattering the uneasy quiet. It was her mother, her voice apologetic. "Honey, we're going to be even later than we thought. Something came up at the office." Sarah forced a cheerful tone. "No problem, Mom. I'm fine." But the words felt hollow, a thin veil over the growing disquiet. The pang of loneliness intensified, mingling with that strange, unsettling anticipation. It was a cocktail of emotions she couldn't quite decipher, a confusing mix of vulnerability and something akin to excitement. She hated herself a little for feeling it. As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone buzzed again. It was Mark. "Hey, just checking in. Your folks out?" The text was casual, almost routine. He often checked in when her parents were working late, a habit from years ago that had somehow persisted. A strange impulse flickered within her. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to ignore the message, to retreat into the safety of her solitude. But another, more insistent part, craved something. "Yeah," she typed back. "They'll be really late." "You around?" "Just down the street," he replied almost instantly. "Want me to swing by? Keep you company?" Again, she hesitated. Saying no would be easy, a clean break from the unsettling undercurrent that had been building all evening. But the word wouldn't form. "Okay," she texted back, her heart quickening its pace. "Sure. That'd be nice." She told herself it was just politeness, a harmless gesture toward someone who had always been kind to her. But deep down, she knew there was more to it than that. A dangerous curiosity, a pull she couldn't quite resist. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that echoed through the house. Sarah took a deep breath and smoothed down her dress before opening the door. Mark stood there, a little taller than she remembered, his smile a little too wide. "Hey," he said, his eyes flickering over her. "Wow, you look great." The air crackled with an unspoken tension. The initial conversation was stilted, filled with awkward silences and forced smiles. They talked about the weather, about her parents, about anything but the elephant in the room, the years that had passed, the shift in their relationship, the undeniable undercurrent of something more. "This is kind of like old times, isn't it?" Sarah blurted out, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. She shifted on the couch, subtly angling herself closer to him. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but it changed the dynamic in the room. She could feel his gaze on her, a tangible weight. He chuckled nervously. "Yeah, I guess it is. Except you're not building pillow forts anymore." He laughed, but the sound was strained, lacking its usual warmth. Sarah's pulse quickened. This was a game now, a dangerous dance on the edge of something unknown. "Remember that time I had the flu, and you tucked me into bed?" Sarah asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "You read me that story about the little bear, the one with the blue blanket." She watched his face carefully, searching for any flicker of recognition. He shifted uncomfortably. "Vaguely," he said. "It was a long time ago, Sarah. I remember you smelling like Old Spice," she continued, pressing on. and your hand felt warm on my forehead. It was comforting. But also, I don't know, weird. She paused, letting the word hang in the air, a loaded question mark. Mark shifted again, crossing and uncrossing his legs. He avoided her gaze, focusing instead on a point somewhere over her shoulder. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit she remembered from when he was struggling with his college homework. He seemed smaller somehow, less confident. The easygoing charm she remembered from her childhood was gone, replaced by a palpable unease. He fidgeted with the edge of the coffee table, his knuckles white. It was clear he was uncomfortable, but whether it was because of her, the memory, or something else entirely, she couldn't tell. In a move that surprised even herself, Sarah stood up, walked over to Mark, and slowly, deliberately, sat down on his lap. The air in the room seemed to solidify, thick with unspoken desires and a dangerous, electric current. His body tensed beneath her, rigid and unyielding. He didn't say anything, didn't move. His hands hovered awkwardly in the air, unsure of where to go. The silence stretched, broken only by the frantic pounding of her own heart. The blue of her dress seemed to pulse in the dim light, a silent invitation. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. She tilted her head back, searching his face for answers. His expression was unreadable, a confusing mask of surprise, apprehension, and something else she couldn't quite name. Was it desire? Regret? Fear? His eyes, usually so warm and familiar, were clouded with a strange uncertainty. She could see the gears turning in his mind, the internal struggle raging within him. What was he thinking? What was he feeling? And, more importantly, what was he going to do? What was she doing? Was this some desperate attempt to recapture a lost innocence, to rewind the clock to a simpler time? Or was it something darker, a twisted desire to rewrite the past, to test the boundaries of their relationship? Maybe she just wanted attention, a fleeting moment of validation in the face of her own insecurities. Or maybe it was something more, a genuine, albeit misguided, attempt at connection. She didn't know. All she knew was that she was here, sitting on his lap, and the weight of her own motives was almost as heavy as the silence between them. This is wrong. This is so wrong. The thought screamed in Mark's head, a frantic alarm bell he couldn't silence. He remembered Sarah with pigtails and scraped knees, a child who looked up to him with innocent adoration. But the Sarah on his lap now was a woman, beautiful and alluring, and he couldn't deny the pull, the undeniable attraction he felt. He knew he should move her, should say something, anything, to break the spell. But a part of him, a selfish, reckless part, was tempted to stay exactly where he was, to see where this dangerous game would lead. He was caught between his past responsibility and his present desires. Even though Sarah was 19, legally an adult, the echoes of their past relationship lingered, coloring the present with a complex and unsettling hue. He had been her caretaker, a figure of authority and trust. That history, those years of asymmetrical power, couldn't simply be erased. It cast a long shadow, a silent reminder of the inherent imbalance between them. Was she truly making a choice, or was she, in some way, still acting out a script written years ago? Was he capable of seeing her as anything other than the little girl he used to babysit? The questions hung in the air, unanswered and unsettling. Bang! The sudden, sharp sound of a car backfiring shattered the tense silence, jolting them both back to reality. A dog down the street erupted in a frenzy of barking, adding to the chaotic interruption. The spell was broken. The outside world had intruded, a harsh reminder of the boundaries they were so close to crossing. The weight of the moment, the unspoken desires, seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sudden, sharp awareness of the potential consequences. The air, once thick with tension, now felt merely awkward. Sarah scrambled off his lap, a wave of heat flushing her cheeks. The awkwardness that had been present before returned, but now it was amplified, magnified by the unspoken desires that had just hung so heavily in the air. She busied herself straightening her dress, avoiding his gaze. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant barking of the dog. She could feel Mark's eyes on her, a silent question hanging between them. What now? Where did they go from here? The comfortable familiarity they had once shared seemed irrevocably shattered. They tried to pick up the threads of their earlier conversation, but the attempt felt forced and unnatural. Every word seemed weighted with the unspoken tension that lingered in the air. The easy banter they once shared was gone, replaced by careful, measured phrases. They talked about her classes, about his job, about the mundane details of their lives, but the words felt hollow, lacking substance. The memory of what had just transpired hung between them like a fragile, shimmering curtain, impossible to ignore. Each sentence was a careful step, avoiding the topic neither dared to name. Mark checked his watch, a gesture that felt rehearsed, almost theatrical. "Wow, look at the time," he said, his voice strained. "I should probably get going. Early meeting tomorrow." The excuse was flimsy, transparent, but Sarah didn't call him on it. A strange sense of relief washed over her. She didn't want him to stay, not like this, not with the unspoken tension simmering beneath the surface. "Yeah, okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't try to convince him to stay, didn't offer any of the usual polite platitudes. She just wanted him gone. The click of the door closing echoed through the silent house, amplifying her solitude. Sarah sank onto the couch, the blue fabric suddenly feeling cold and unfamiliar. She replayed the evening in her mind, a relentless loop of awkward silences, hesitant glances, and the undeniable heat that had flared between them. She dissected every word, every gesture, searching for hidden meanings and unspoken truths. What had she been trying to prove? What had Mark been thinking? Had she imagined the attraction, or had it been real? The questions swirled in her mind, a dizzying vortex of confusion and regret. She couldn't deny that she had initiated the physical contact. She had been the one to sit on his lap, to cross that line. But even as she acknowledged her own agency, a nagging voice whispered in her ear. What about the power imbalance? What about their history? He had been her babysitter, a position of trust and authority. Could she truly say that she had been in a position to make a completely free and informed choice? Or had she been influenced, even subconsciously, by the echoes of their past relationship? The potential for exploitation loomed large, casting a dark shadow over the evening's events. A wave of panic washed over her. She considered calling her parents, pouring out the story in a torrent of tears and confession. Or maybe a friend, someone who could offer a listening ear and a comforting presence. The most drastic option, the one that lingered at the edge of her thoughts, was calling the police. She imagined explaining what had happened, the awkward silences, the unspoken desires, the weight of their history. But the words caught in her throat, choked by a mixture of shame, confusion, and a strange, inexplicable sense of loyalty. She couldn't do it. Not yet. The decision solidified, a heavy weight settling in her chest. She wouldn't tell anyone. Not her parents, not her friends, not the police. The reasons were a tangled mess of shame, confusion, and a misguided desire to protect Mark, to shield him from the potential consequences of his actions. She would bury the incident deep within herself, lock it away in a hidden corner of her mind, and pretend it never happened. It was the easiest path, the path of least resistance. But even as she made the decision, she knew it was a lie, a fragile facade that wouldn't hold forever. Days bled into weeks. The blue dress remained tucked away in the back of her closet, a silent reminder of the evening she desperately wanted to forget. She avoided Mark at all costs, taking different routes to school, steering clear of his usual haunts. His calls went unanswered, his texts unread. She couldn't face him, couldn't bear to revisit the scene of her own internal turmoil. Each unanswered call and ignored text was a small act of defiance, a desperate attempt to reclaim control over her own narrative. But the silence only amplified the weight of the secret she was carrying. Sleep offered no escape. Nightmares plagued her, vivid replays of that evening, distorted and amplified by her subconscious. She would wake up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, the memory of Mark's unreadable expression seared into her mind. Flashbacks intruded into her waking hours, triggered by seemingly innocuous things: the scent of Old Spice, a glimpse of a blue dress, the sound of a car backfiring. The world around her felt like a minefield, each step threatening to detonate a fresh wave of anxiety and regret. The buried incident refused to stay buried. The constant anxiety, the sleepless nights, the intrusive flashbacks, it was becoming unbearable. She couldn't keep living like this, haunted by a memory she refused to confront. She realized she needed help, someone to guide her through the tangled mess of emotions and help her make sense of what had happened. The idea of talking to a therapist surfaced in her mind, a lifeline in a sea of confusion. It was a daunting prospect, admitting her vulnerability to a stranger. But the alternative, continuing to suffer in silence, was even more terrifying. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As she considered therapy, Sarah began to sift through her childhood memories of Mark, searching for clues, for any indication that the events of that night had been foreshadowed. Had she simply misinterpreted his actions, projecting her own desires onto him? Or had there been signs she had missed, subtle gestures or lingering glances that now took on a new, more sinister meaning? She questioned every interaction, every hug, every bedtime story. Were they innocent expressions of care, or were they something more, something predatory? The comfortable narrative of her childhood began to crumble, replaced by an unsettling uncertainty. One afternoon, while grocery shopping, Sarah froze. Across the aisle, amidst the bright displays of fruits and vegetables, stood Mark. He looked older, his face etched with a weariness she hadn't noticed before. Their eyes met, and a wave of emotions crashed over her: fear, anger, sadness, a lingering flicker of something else. The carefully constructed wall she had built around the memory threatened to crumble. The air crackled with the unspoken tension of that night, a reminder of the secret they both carried. It was time to confront him. He approached her hesitantly, his eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and something akin to guilt. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigerators. "Hey." The air crackled with unspoken words, with the weight of the secret they both carried. After a moment of strained silence, he spoke again. "Listen," he said, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. If I did anything to make you uncomfortable that night, I truly am. It was never my intention." The apology felt hollow, inadequate, a band-aid on a gaping wound. "It wasn't about intentions, Mark," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "It was about what happened. It was wrong." She met his gaze, refusing to back down. "It was wrong for you to let me sit on your lap. It was wrong for you not to stop me." She needed him to acknowledge the reality of the situation, to take responsibility for his part in it, regardless of his intentions. His apology, while perhaps sincere, felt like a way to absolve himself of blame, to minimize the impact of his actions. She wouldn't let him off so easily. "You were my babysitter, Mark," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "You were supposed to protect me. Even then, even when I was a little girl, there was a power imbalance. You were older, more experienced, in a position of authority." She paused, taking a deep breath. "And that night, even though I was 19, that power imbalance still existed. You had a responsibility to recognize it, to acknowledge it, and to stop things from going too far. You failed that responsibility." The words hung in the air, a harsh indictment. Mark's face hardened. The guilt and apprehension seemed to vanish, replaced by a defensive anger. "That's not fair, Sarah," he retorted, his voice rising. "I didn't force you to do anything. You were the one who sat on my lap. You were the one who joked about it being like old times." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "I think you're misinterpreting things," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I think you're trying to blame me for something that wasn't my fault. I was just being nice, checking in on you. You were the one who made it weird. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me, Mark." Sarah retorted, her voice rising, attracting the attention of nearby shoppers. "I was vulnerable, I was alone, and you knew it. You took advantage of the situation, of the trust one placed in you. You were never just checking in on me," she continued, her voice trembling with anger. "You wanted something more, and you used our history, our past relationship, to try to get it. You manipulated me, and you're still trying to manipulate me now by pretending it was all my fault. The confrontation escalated, fueled by years of unspoken tension and buried resentment. With a final, dismissive glare, Mark turned and stormed off, leaving Sarah standing alone in the middle of the grocery store aisle, her body trembling with anger and a profound sense of disappointment. Shoppers stared, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. The confrontation had been a disaster. She had hoped for understanding, for accountability, for some sense of closure. Instead, she was left with nothing but unresolved anger and the bitter realization that Mark would never take responsibility for his actions. The wound remained open, festering with resentment. Standing in the middle of the grocery store, surrounded by judging eyes, Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. It was clear that she couldn't deal with this on her own. The trauma of that night, compounded by the failed confrontation with Mark, was too much to bear. She made a decision. She would seek professional help, someone who could provide her with the tools and support she needed to process her emotions and heal from the incident. She would find a therapist and finally start to unpack the tangled mess of her past. It was time to take care of herself. The first therapy session was terrifying. Sitting in the sterile office, facing a kind-faced stranger, Sarah felt a wave of vulnerability wash over her. But as she began to talk, to unravel the tangled threads of her past, a sense of relief began to emerge. She spoke about Mark, about their history, about the night her world had shifted on its axis. She explored the complex emotions surrounding their relationship, the lingering affection, the sense of betrayal, the weight of the power imbalance. It was a painful process, but with each session, she felt a little lighter, a little stronger. Slowly but surely, Sarah began to heal. She learned to recognize the patterns of manipulation and control that had shaped her relationship with Mark, both in the past and the present. She started to set boundaries, to assert her needs, and to prioritize her own well-being. She discovered her own strength, her own resilience. She learned that she was worthy of love and respect, and that she had the power to protect herself from future harm. The nightmares began to fade, replaced by dreams of empowerment and self-acceptance. She was finally taking control of her life. As Sarah healed, she realized that her experience, though painful, could be used to help others. She decided to volunteer at a local women's shelter, offering support and guidance to young women who had been through similar situations. She found solace in sharing her story, in connecting with others who understood the complex emotions of trauma and betrayal. She realized that she wasn't alone and that her voice could make a difference. It was a way to turn her pain into purpose, to transform her experience into a source of strength for others. Volunteering at the shelter ignited a passion within Sarah. She realized that her voice could be a powerful tool for change, and she decided to become an advocate for survivors of abuse. She started speaking at local schools and community events, sharing her story and raising awareness about the issue of power imbalances and exploitation. She joined a support group for survivors, finding strength and solidarity in their shared experiences. She became a vocal advocate for policy changes and increased resources for victims of abuse. She was determined to make a difference, to create a world where other young women wouldn't have to endure what she had. Years passed. Sarah dedicated herself to her advocacy work, becoming a respected voice in the movement to end abuse and exploitation. She earned a degree in social work, using her knowledge and experience to help others navigate the complex challenges of trauma and healing. She built a successful and fulfilling life, defined not by the events of her past, but by her determination to create a better future. She was strong, confident, and independent, a survivor who had transformed her pain into power. The little girl who had once looked to Mark for comfort was now a woman who stood tall on her own. Years later, Sarah could look back on that night, on the complicated relationship with Mark, with a sense of clarity and understanding. She realized that she wasn't defined by what had happened to her, by Mark's actions, or by her own choices in that moment. She was defined by how she chose to respond to it. She had refused to be a victim, to be silenced by shame or fear. She had taken control of her narrative, transforming her pain into a source of strength and purpose. She had become the author of her own story, writing a new ending, one filled with hope, resilience, and empowerment. The camera panned out, showing Sarah standing on a stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight. She was addressing a crowd of young women, her voice strong and clear, filled with passion and conviction. Her eyes sparkled with hope and determination as she spoke about the importance of self-worth, boundaries, and speaking out against abuse. She was no longer a victim, defined by the events of her past. She was a survivor, a beacon of hope for others, a testament to the power of resilience and the transformative potential of the human spirit. The future stretched before her, bright and full of promise.